Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's conversation of TBQ Live. Absolutely delighted to be here today with two of my favorite guests, Daryl and Rosie. Hi, both of you.
Hi, hi.
Hi.
Hello, lovely, lovely to see both of you. And to everyone else who's joining us, or indeed any of you who will be listening, this is a recording which often happens with TBQ Live. Welcome once again. And for those of you who are new, this is TBQ Live. We are here every second and fourth Tuesday of every month at 12:30 London time. Usually, I have with myself Maria Chase, who is the co-host to TBQ Live. She is a neuro leadership coach and specialist, and I'm a leadership accelerator. And we take this time and opportunity to explore what we call the science and art of leadership. And often, what we tend to do is pick out one of the 9 levers from my book, The Brilliance Quotient, hence the acronym TBQ. And we interrogate ourselves and explore the science behind leadership across those 9 levers, or one of them. Or indeed, we have experts like we have today with us and ask them their views and opinions, and hopefully engage our audience, sometimes live and sometimes indeed through the comments that come to us. Today, I'm extremely delighted because we are going to be having a conversation which I think is turning the world around: technology. We always knew that there was an opportunity for technology almost a decade or 2 decades ago when we started talking about the digital transformation. But now, post COVID, and what, if I may say so, in a war torn world, there is an even more immediacy and urgency for us to look at how technology might actually be something that could transform the world that we live in. And it is a mission and objective that we have at the Collaborators UK, but indeed it is a purpose that's there in the mind of most of the leaders who are with us, who are listening to us, or indeed the people that we interact with. Daryl and Rosie are going to be joining me today because they are experts in their own field. And indeed, I'm delighted that they're also mentors to the Ascent Leadership Mastery program that I'll be touching upon very briefly towards the end. Daryl has an amazing, amazing career journey. He started off in the world of pediatrics, and then he moved into becoming a serial entrepreneur and has been the founder, executive chairman of a company called Reuse Technology that he will be talking about in a bit. And of course, he has become a person who has not only started the company, but he became multi-million very soon. So welcome, Daryl. It's absolutely a delight to have you here with us. And thank you for being here.
Thank you, Rina. It's a pleasure to be here today.
So, what's keeping you busy nowadays, if I may ask? Because I know you're not in the UK. So, tell us what's keeping
Nah.
you busy very briefly.
Well, I'm currently in Tobago. I'm just back in, sitting at the back of a little rainforest where I'm working. I've been working from for the past few months. And we'll talk a bit more about that later on. But so, it's really part of this journey in terms of growth and leadership, which we'll explore as we go along. But that's what I'm doing at the moment. I've got a team in the UK that's still working on the business, and I'm supporting them from here. But I'm back in the UK next in 4 weeks' time.
And I
And
love
yeah,
the fact that we have a rooster behind you,
you
making
do.
its
You'll hear
presence
lots.
felt.
You will hear the roosters and the birds in the background while I'm talking when I'm
That's
presenting.
fabulous. Absolutely
Thank you.
fabulous. Thank you. Absolutely great to have you here. And I also have with me today Rosie, very special. Rosie and I met actually through LinkedIn. So thank you, LinkedIn and the Institute of Directors. Actually, it was one of the events. Rosie has been in the digital technology world for almost 3 decades. Senior business strategist, leader, client partner at Wipro, and actually is very recently started off a podcast on neurodiversity. So welcome, Rosie.
Thanks, Rina. Pleasure to be with you today. And Daryl.
And, lovely. And what's keeping you busy? What's new with you?
Lots of things. Work mainly. As you said, I'm a client partner at Wipro and been at Wipro for nearly 3 decades now. Grown from role to role, if I may say so, pretty diverse roles across the business development arena. And on the personal side, I do have a passion for neurodiversity, especially championing the D&I aspects of neurodiversity in the workplace. And like you rightly said, I'm working on the podcast series for that topic in an attempt to raise awareness on various aspects, the good, the bad, and the ugly in terms of how neurodiversity can be looked at differently, more positively, for wider good, all in the name of sustainability and equity, equal opportunity across the board.
Excellent. And I'm sure we're going to touch upon that very topic in a bit, but we're looking forward to your podcast as well. So, ladies and gentlemen,
Thanks.
those of you who were with us today, thank you for being here, Rosie. So, what is it that we're going to cover today? So, the first thing that we'd love to do, so I did mention we talk about the science and art of leadership. So, we will begin by setting the scene by talking about a little bit around neuroscience. And the reason why we want to do that is because, as you can see in the title, it's about rethinking technology. So, it is something to do with thinking, and it's about rethinking. But what we really want to put forward to you is that perhaps one of the reasons or one of the contributors why we are in the problem state that we are in today in organizations and the whole world and the economy is because a lot of people are falling to default and limited thinking. So we're going to open up the doors on that conversation, and we're going to pick that as a framework to talk about 4 examples in the tech sector that Rosie and Dara will share with us, and possible reframes that could actually help turn around the way that we live our lives and the way that we could transform the world that we live in. We're also going to be touching upon the World Economic Forum forecast around skills and how cognitive diversity and agility are going to be something which is very, very important. And indeed, if I get an opportunity, I'll talk a little bit about the ALMP program, because we are absolutely passionate in helping leaders really change the way they think, act, behave, make judgments and decisions. So that's what we're going to be covering today. Very briefly, let me talk about the neuroscience, and then I'd like to get into some examples. So some of you might have heard about a gentleman called Daniel Kahneman. Daniel Kahneman, if I'm pronouncing that surname correctly, is a gentleman who is a psychologist. He's an Israeli-American psychologist and economist, so interesting combination. And he won the Nobel Prize for Economic Sciences way back in 2002 for the work that he did where he interspersed neuroscience, psychology, and judgment and decision making. And as we all know, one of the biggest aspects that any leader has to work with at any point of time is to make judgments, to make choices, and to make decisions. And he played it out in the way of saying that there are 2 ways that we think, and he called it system 1 and system 2 thinking. And when he was elaborating it, he identified certain blind spots that we all have that might be leading to default and limited thinking. So let me elaborate what I mean by system 1 and system 2 thinking in Daniel's way of explaining it out. So system 1 thinking is what he says is something that does not require any effort. It's almost automatic, it's instinctive, it's quick, it's unconscious, it's connected to our emotions, and in a way that he calls the word intuitive, where we don't know why we do it, but we make the decision, right? So, for example, when you are thinking about crossing the road, it's instinctive, it's automatic. We know how to do it. We don't really play it out and think, how is it that I must cross the road, and what does the red light mean, and what does the green light mean? We just do it. Or sometimes when you're working with somebody, you realize that you don't like a certain person. There's something that makes you arrive at that decision, and then you become the author of that decision and say, well, actually, I don't like working with certain people, or I don't like this particular situation, which is outside my comfort zone. That's system 1 thinking. Indeed, in decision making, if I was to ask you 2 plus 2, what is it equal to? You'll say 4 without thinking. That's a system 1 thinking. It's automatic, it's unconscious. And a lot of it is related to emotions, and that's important. And I'll come to in a minute, because that's creating the problem here. System 2 thinking is something which is more slower, rational, it's conscious, it's more logical, you make more of an effort around it, it's more complex, where you start thinking about various parameters and analyzing and making a decision. So similar, as I said, 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. If I asked you what is 24,500 plus 288, your brain is going to engage in a different way. That system 2 thinking, because now it's a complex problem it's trying to sort out, right? Or if I was to ask you, don't cross the road, but come out of this maze that you are in, I put you in the middle of a maze, your brain is going to work in a different way. Or if I was to ask you, not only are you you have to work with the person that you don't like, just as I gave the example in system 1, you need to find a way. And that's when you're engaging system 2 thinking. So these are the two systems that Daniel talks about that we use a lot as a basis in the ALMP program when we're talking about applied neurosciences. But because of system one thinking, which is there in all of us, it leads to something known as cognitive shortcuts, which leads to decisions which are very limited and in the short run. It leads to certain assumptions that we might be making. It might lead to certain limiting beliefs that we have, which are there then the collective consciousness of the world that we live in, and we think that is the operating system and that's how decisions need to be made. Or there are certain interpretations that we make, which could be individual, but we believe that our interpretations are correct. And all of this are really byproducts of system one thinking. And why it becomes important to talk about system one thinking right now is because when we live in a world which is unpredictable, or in a world whereby we are being hit by a lot of stress triggers, which we are at this moment of time, we default more on system one thinking. So you have to really train yourself, and that's what we do in the ALMP program, is train people to be able to become more aware about these shortcuts, assumptions, beliefs, and interpretation, so that they can have more cognitive abilities, bandwidth, and skills. So that's the background per se. But what I'd like to do right now with the help of Daryl and Rosie, is really play it out about how we are seeing it in the world around us right now, in the decisions that people are taking. So, Darren, I'd like to begin the conversation with you and your own
Sure.
business, and perhaps let's talk a little bit around this whole topic about cognitive shortcuts, which is really about, as I was saying, that intuitive system one decision making that people are taking. So, over to you.
So that's really interesting. I reflected on this, in preparation for this this session. And when I worked as a nurse, we had what this thing, it was called an expert practitioner. You work in system one thinking constantly when you become an expert in what you do, because you have to adapt very quickly, intuitively, without thinking, especially when doing procedures. But it's not, you don't know what you're doing. You're actually working from experience and knowledge, but in a very intuitive, very expert way. But when I went into business, it required something different. I can't just, walk about and respond to emergencies. I'm thinking a little bit deeper, a little bit wider. So there's a bit more depth and breadth of thinking of what we're trying to achieve. And that required me to unwire some of my system one ways of behaving and thinking. I had to really start to unwire that, because remember, I'm programmed and I'm seasoned in behaving in a certain way. And I now had to sit down and start thinking a little bit more logically, rationally, deeper, wider, to really understand the depth of the challenges that we're facing in business and trying to start and grow a business. And so this cognitive shortcut for me, it was really about not being lazy in my thinking and just going to default mode, but having to really start to go into uncomfortable places, to start to explore and expand my thinking about what needs to be done, and really start to unpick things from a business perspective.
Fabulous.
And certainly in the IT world, you have experts, and these guys and girls, men and women, know what they're doing and they instinctively do things. But I think this conversation is where we start to think about, well, if we want to push a business forward, or we want to reframe the IT world, or we want to rethink IT, we now need to start to even challenge our own defaults. And I think that's where we're heading with the conversation, right, Rena?
Indeed, absolutely. And I'm so glad you brought up these words such as unwiring, because there are certain things that we learn along the way. And that
Yes.
perhaps becomes the reason why we have reached certain positions in leadership positions. But sometimes when the world changes, or indeed when you
Yes.
need to be creative and innovative and change the way that we look at how a solution can be created or change the world, it
Yeah,
requires us to think differently. And I
for
think so.
sure.
This is a great segue to really talk about your business around circular economies and reuse itself, and how why is it that you started it off? What's the business case of an organization such as yours, and how is it like probably challenging some of the reframes that we need today?
So
I
when
know
I
a lot of
start,
questions there, Daryl, but
I
let's
I
get
know. So
first.
when I started, I think it was still very system two, because as a startup business, you literally just doing everything that you need to do to
Right.
try and get it off the ground, and you're still in that default mode until you can get this business off the ground. I think it's very, because you're reacting constantly.
Yeah.
Um, as the business grew and got established and well embedded and became more profitable, I then had to start thinking about, how do I grow this business, or how do we
Yeah.
grow the business? And I couldn't rely on system one thinking anymore, because it couldn't be reactive anymore. It had to start to become more more system 2, more rational, more logical, more planned, and more, and so initially we started just buying and selling, and then we had to start thinking, well, the business can't sustain on just buying and selling. We had to start to think of ourselves as part of an ecosystem. And
Nice.
how is the business connected and interconnected with other businesses, with people, with other systems? And so that ecosystemic thinking started to grow and emerge within the business. And that's when we started to think, well, it's no longer business just about profitability and bottom line approach, which is the default for most businesses, I guess. We started to think about, how do we become more sustainable? If you want to grow a long-term business, one that's going to be here more than 5 or 10 years, how do we become sustainable? So everybody's using this word these days, but what does that really mean to
Correct.
become sustainable? Not just financially, but socially and environmentally as well. And that's when the circular economy idea started to emerge, or we started to think more about it, and then we kind of tapped into what's going on in the circular world. And I think we're going to talk a little bit later on. You're going to prompt me on this, hopefully, Rena, about how other business leaders in the IT world could start thinking a bit wider and deeper about circularity and about sustainability in a meaningful way within their IT ecosystem.
How about if I give you the prompter right now? Tell us a little bit
Go.
more about it. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So again, this is now linking to conversations we've had where we meet IT leaders, IT managers within their system, and from my experience, and this is just my experience, these folks they look for the most secure systems, the sexiest hardware. It's all about speed and security and the best kit available. And quite often they tend to not think about legacy equipment or think about, is their systems, is their network, are they sustainable? Not just financially, but environmentally as well and socially. So are they sort of connecting or looking at their IT systems and their network as an ecosystem, which is a living, breathing, growing, dynamic thing? And so this is where we start to introduce this concept to IT leaders to say, well, yes, you could have the latest, newest, fastest kit, but also does your entire network need brand new, fastest, most secure? Or could you now start thinking about, in a more circular way and a sustainable way, could you work with refurbish? Could you start using different contractors from SMEs to build your sustainable IT network? So not just thinking about what you have, but starting to go outside and push the boundaries. And my point about this is that the planet only has so much finite resources for brand new hardware within the supply chain. And we're saying to IT leaders, maybe you need to start removing that dependency on new for 100% of your network, and maybe start thinking about 10 or 15% where you could use refurbish, where you could start reusing stuff in different parts of your network where you don't need brand new here and there. And we've seen it in the pandemic, because now manufacturers are taking between 3 to 6 months to supply brand new kit. We
Yeah.
know that because of the pandemic, because of the stuff that was going on in China with chips and the floods and everything else. So it forced IT leaders to start thinking about, oh, maybe we need to start reusing our hardware for leaders and give it to brand new starters, because we can't get brand new kit from the manufacturers. And so the circumstances have forced it. And I'm saying, maybe we can, if we plan in advance, especially in terms of business continuity, maybe we can create an ecosystem which is more integrated, which is more sustainable, and genuinely more
Yes.
resilient.
Yes. Absolutely. I love that.
Yeah. So that's where what
Yeah.
I'm thinking about in terms of this whole.
So just Yeah. So just one question more
Go
for
on.
you, Daryl, and then I'll move on to another example just to play it out. So
Sure.
I hear, this whole thing about circular economy. There's a business case for it. It's great for the environment. It also actually helps out in bottom line as well,
It
because
does.
you really don't have to invest in new
No,
hardware.
no.
You can actually use it within the organization.
Yeah.
So it ticks the boxes. However, my question is, have you noticed that before, perhaps pre-pandemic, there was a default pattern whereby leaders felt that the only solution was to buy new hardware? And if so, why? Why were they doing that? Why was this not
So
available to them earlier?
default was to buy brand new because it's the easiest option. You procure via your manufacturers or your distribution channels, and you just buy brand new, and it gets delivered, and that
Yeah.
was it. Okay. It takes a little bit more thinking and time to start to diversify your supply chain and say, well, we could buy a certain amount from this. And also, there's an element of trust from refurbished kit where is it
Indeed.
secure? Is it fast enough? Will it work? Okay. But the circumstances in the last 2 years have forced us now to think, well, it can work. Yes, we can explore different supply chains. Yes, we can extend the life of a laptop from 3 years to 4 years, maybe. And yes, it helps the bottom line because we've increased the depreciation life of that piece of kit.
Lovely.
So,
Love
so
it.
yeah, yes, that's where we head in with this.
Lovely. And that's a great thing for
Rina, if
you
I
to have
may,
seen. Yes, absolutely, Rosie, jump in.
if I may supplement what Daryl has just said,
Yes.
I think it's also inherent on the software giants of the world, right? The Microsofts, the Apples, who come out with the latest software technology. And these software technologies, the newer ones, only run on the latest hardware kits, forcing customer enterprises to upgrade their networks, their entire IT ecosystem. Now, this adds to the digital divide that we talk about in the world of sustainability, right? Where you've got a world that has a lot of digital, keep on transforming to the latest and greatest technologies, and then there is a part of the world and many millions of people on the planet who don't have basic technology. Now, how do you marry these two things together, right? If these software and hardware technologies would take the responsibility that as and when they force customer enterprises to upgrade to the latest and greatest, why don't they also take the responsibility of taking the old kit back and getting it reused in places with populations that have to, a long bridge to come to kind of minimize that digital divide as much as possible. So there are possible solutions that leaders need to come in together and think think sustainability, think achieving those goals, but not just lip sync it, but actually act on it. And I think there's always a possibility to find solutions. The solutions are there; they need to be acted upon.
And what a great add-on, because it's a great segue into the point that we were having a discussion earlier about this whole end-of-life systems threat that seems to be there, and therefore the need to upgrade at a certain point of time. Because the point that Darrell was talking about is really almost from a system one perspective, is because buying new is simple and reusing the old is complex and requires us to change our behaviors and thinking. It's a cognitive shortcut, or let's buy something new. And then the ecosystem starts becoming even more supportive to that system one thinking, as you were saying, Rosie, about having a software that can't be used in old. And so therefore that makes that complexity even larger, default into doing something which is easy, which is what system
Absolutely.
one thinking is.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
to your point about this end of life systems thread that you just been referring to, again, I'd like you to just unpack from your perspective, Rosie. Why is it that people are doing? Why is it that Microsoft or these big giants would go on for that kind of an approach versus I don't know, something which is more
If they don't,
transferable?
somebody else will come up with. So there's a lot of disruption happening all over the world. I mean, who knew that the world of taxis was going to be disrupted? Or forget the world of taxis, right? The world of real estate agents, right? Car parks today are not used because people use Uber. So real estate firms are finding an impact on their revenues because of the likes of Uber and Olas of the world. There is clearly this is clearly an era of disruption. So I can't say that why are tech companies bringing products to end of life faster. Earlier the life cycle used to stretch to 5 to 10 years. Now it's barely 2 to 3 years, and corporate companies have to retain their competitive edge, and if they don't do that, tech being a key enabler of the business, then they lag behind. So it's a vicious circle. As a tough one to say, why should corporates be doing this? But I think the solution, the way out is there still exists a digital divide, and with every upgrade of technology, there is a broader or a larger divide, and that can be actually those supposed end of life products should be supported by the same corporates that bring it to end of life for the corporate world into areas of opportunity that exist for bridging the digital divide.
And I love the point you're making. I'm going to throw a hypothesis to the two of you, and I'd love to kind of get your comments on it. One of my senses is that, and this is not just me, this is often a conversation that I've had with people who are board members as well, of saying this whole challenge between profit and purpose. If you
Correct.
think about the ecosystem that we have grown up in, I myself, when I did my business management graduation, what's really drummed into our head is that profit and bottom lines is what you need to really aim for, and you've got to maintain the shareholders' returns. That becomes the driving force, and so therefore the whole belief system is that's how we got to operate, and therefore what are the choices that we have as a leader to change that around. However, if we had to expand that belief system in the world right now, saying that profit is not just important, purpose and impact is important as well. And not only are you responsible to shareholders, you're responsible to all the stakeholders that your community kind of exists in. Would that make a change to some of these behaviors? Don't know. Just a question to the two of you. What are your thoughts if that's triggering off anything in either of you?
Absolutely. I think it's upon us as shareholders, as investors, as board members to now start asking these questions with a very, very serious intent to act upon it. If those are not coming from these avenues, then and even as employees, I think we should ask our employers as to what is being done with the tech that we hand back when we get an upgraded laptop or a new laptop or new tech in the organization, whether it's a new application that has been introduced for a new business process or a new application that has been brought into the ecosystem to enhance the business. It's upon each one of us to play our roles in challenging the norm as it is today, because the norm is definitely not enough.
That's so true. Daryl, thoughts from you on this one?
Yes, so I've always asked myself the question. I mean, businesses are here to grow and produce and create wealth, as it were. The question is, can we decouple that economic growth from resource usage, or that intense resource usage of natural resources I'm talking about? Can we decouple that and still grow as businesses? And I think Rosie made a really great point there, in that as we start to look at the bigger picture, we can grow our businesses and still not have to be so dependent on natural resources around the planet. We just have to now move ourselves from those cognitive default shortcuts that we've been wired into, and move away from the bottom line being the main driver to maybe vision, purpose, and the bigger picture on the planet. What is the bigger picture? What is the next generation? How are they going to judge us? Are we serving them well and correctly by the way that we're doing things? So they will walk away with their feet at some point if they're not happy with the way we do things. So I genuinely believe it can be done. And we need to be more meaningful and genuine in our approach to sustainability within our IT networks, within our systems.
Fabulous. Excellent. All right, let me jump to a couple of other so-called system one thinking that might be limiting, and if we were to challenge and reframe it, it could lead to far better solutions. And what better than artificial intelligence, and to bring that into the conversation, because that's the big item that's changing and having lots of views by everyone. But of course, even in that field, we are beginning to see that there are a lot of assumptions perhaps that people are making in the whole topic of artificial intelligence, and we could have probably one whole session on that. But I'd love you to kind of pick up a few ideas, Rosie. I know you do a lot of work around this topic, about what kind of assumptions are people making in the design of artificial intelligence, or even the use of artificial intelligence. So want to share some thoughts?
So yeah, Reena, let me take a couple of examples, and
Sure.
this is whether it's it's all about stereotypes and the unconscious bias that creeps into when artificial intelligence was brought about in the tech world. I don't think people who developed it had that conscious bias of what they were producing. It's a bit like garbage in, garbage out, right? So if the data for any artificial intelligence engine, the input data is inaccurate, the output will be inaccurate. At the same time, if it is biased inputs, the outputs are biased as well. I'll take a couple of common examples as well as some examples that have sort of sparked discussions in the tech world. One is about gender stereotypes, right? So whether it's the likes of Siri or Cortana or Alexa, these are all personal assistants through artificial intelligence channels. And guess what? They're all names of ladies. This is gender stereotyping, because whenever we ask somebody to think of an assistant, you're more likely to think woman than man, right? At the same time, when you're asking children in a nursery class, and this has been an experiment, where children were asked to draw the image of a fireman, the image of a surgeon, the image of a teacher. And, it was very, very expected that when they were asked to draw a surgeon or a pilot or other professionals, they were mainly drawing the figure of a male, whereas teachers, nurses were female. Right now, this is probably what we've grown with as well, and it's not to blame anybody, but it's now becoming conscious that, is this right? Just because we've grown with it, doesn't make it right. So because we're in this age where gender stereotyping or racial stereotyping is now being addressed consciously, let's address it upfront and call these practices out. Now, in the world of AI, again, if you take translation, right, that's become a tool for use by many people, including in the field of crime. And you've got a Palestinian who had posted "Good morning" in his language, but the translator actually translated it as "attack them." The police came across that post, the translated post, and immediately acted on by going and arresting this person without even checking with a native speaker as to what was posted, because they trusted the automation, right? It's very simple. We've grown in a society where we overtrust automation. When you go to an ATM machine, you don't count whether you've actually withdrawn 200 pounds or whatever you're withdrawing. You trust the machine and you put it straight into your wallet. At the same time, if you do happen to go to a bank, which is very, very rare for us these days, and to withdraw cash from a person at the teller window, you still end up checking the cash that is handed out to you by the person, right? So it's over trusting automation that is leading to a lot of stereotypes. Or even there was an experiment where the police were given the automated tools and the artificial intelligence to predict crimes. Now, the input was that area X was always full of criminals, and area YZ were not as crime infested. Guess what? The AI engine for any sort of output was continually predicting that area to be infested with criminals. So there were a lot of false positives. Now, what is this resulting in? This is resulting in a further divide of what is the actual fact. And this has obviously led to movements like Black Lives Matter and a lot of other movements that we're seeing around. But these are automation biases that creep in, especially in the design of AI. And it's extremely important for us to make sure that there is an ethical input that is given. And the way to give that ethical input is to include diversity of input into that particular AI, whether it is clinical trials, for example, right? If the clinical trials are going to be testing only a Western European population, right, or the Western world population, it is not the resultant vaccine or drug is not going to be effective on, say, African or Asian or other native populations.
Yep.
It's but obvious because the input of that particular DNA and profile was not used as input in that trial engine. So these are different examples where unconsciously the bias has been crept into at the design stage, as we call it, and therefore the outcomes are more challenging and increasing the divide, for so to speak.
Thank you, Rosie, for opening up that very vast topic on how assumptions and beliefs are right now really seeded into the whole subject of artificial intelligence. So, some great examples there. I know that you're creeping into an amazing conversation around diversity as well. But before I do that, Daryl, any quick comments on the whole assumptions, artificial intelligence from your side?
Well, just briefly, I mean, it's not my area of expertise, but you can just logically think that, if you're creating machine learning coding and whatnot, and the coder or the software developer is bringing in their own biases, you can imagine what could happen. And that's just from a pure logical sort of common person's position on this.
And a very important position, Daryl, because you're right. Who is making artificial intelligence? Where is the data coming from? It's coming from the human brain. And the human brain, we know, has got unconscious bias seeded in, and it's got assumptions and cognitive shortcuts. They obviously are going to come in from into the world of artificial intelligence. So some great conversations there. And also, I think so the topic that you have unpacked slightly, and I would like to jump in and spend a couple of minutes on it, is this whole thing about bringing diversity of thought and viewpoints in. Why it becomes so important, because it's a great way to make sure that we're not making assumptions, or we're not having cognitive shortcuts, and we're not kind of going through the norm, so as to speak. And we call that interpretations, because each one of us have got different interpretations. But the fact is that the way that the brain is made is, when I make a decision, I feel that that's the best interpretation, so I hold on to that being the truth, whereas somebody else might see it in a different way, but there is a conflict that takes place. And in the world of interpretations and being able to get different people together, we're seeing that happen a lot in organizations when they're looking at their talent spectrum. And they're looking at the kind of talent that they can bring in, who can bring in that richness of diversity. And given that we're having a lot of conversations about thinking and thoughts, I thought it'd be useful for us to very quickly touch upon a topic that I know that you are, it's very close to your heart, Rosie, and indeed mine as well, which is around neurodiversity. Tell us a little bit about why that might be an interesting viewpoint for organizations and business leaders to consider, so that they could break the limiting default thinking that interpretations might bring into decision making.
So neurodiversity typically, very unfairly, has been associated as disabilities, right? And whether it's autism or dyspraxia, dyslexia, a lot of physiological conditions, people tend to want to avoid them. And with the new D&I seriousness that is now creeping into corporations, corporations are willing to make a true effort in terms of including, but are a little lost in terms of what does that mean for them? What changes do they need to make, in accommodating these different diverse set of talent, right? There is not much that they ask for, actually. The neurodiversity that exists has always existed, right? You've got the likes of Mozart and Einstein and the likes of Freddie Mercury in the world of art. You've got, majority of scientists and, very, very high IQ people have had some sort of neurodiversity in themselves, because if it wasn't, they wouldn't be thinking that outside the box. Neurodiversity brings across the unique intellectual capabilities that most of us so-called privileged neurotypicals don't have, actually, right?
I'm not too
We
sure
seem
how
to
privileged
overlook.
we are.
Yeah,
I'm not too sure
absolutely.
how
We think we
privileged
are.
we can call ourselves. Go on,
Yeah,
please. Yeah.
we think we are because we are in the majority. And that's where the
Yeah, that's
difference
true.
creeps up, right? That they and again, just like the digital divide exists between different nations because of the wealth of those nations being at different levels, in the neurodiverse world, majority people with neurodiverse talent do not speak up as often as they should. It's being encouraged and changed for them to make the change, but it's very, very difficult for them to make the change unless the vast majority of neurotypicals are going to embrace that neurodiversity truly. And
Correct.
it doesn't take much. The reasonable adjustments that they ask for are simple things like yellow pages of a notepad in your stationery cupboard instead of just the simple white ones. It eases the and increases the ability for a dyspraxic person to focus on. Now, if a yellow background actually increases focus, how is it going to be different to actually include that in your stationery cupboard in the office space and encourage higher productivity, right? How is it different for an autistic person to seek some quiet, less sensory active location to be more productive? It's a reasonable adjustment, and I think many neurotypicals even ask for it, but don't, it doesn't bother us if there is a lot of background noise. Whereas for some autistic people with a lot of hypersensitive hearing, uh, they can't focus. So it's these
Absolutely.
reasonable adjustments that we are asking for, and corporates need to realize and raise the awareness that just a little bit of reasonable adjustment is actually going to not just make the neurodiverse talent feel more included and therefore more productive, but even the neurotypical privileged lot of us are going to benefit from those same adjustments. And it's all about including that neurodiverse talent in the design of your workspace or the design of a product or the design of an artificial intelligence application. I don't know, whatever.
Yeah, indeed. And what a great, I mean, there's so many points that you made out there. And I think so for me, what's interesting to just almost pull out and tease out is that actually, when we begin to do that, is really be able to embrace neurodiversity and indeed diversity of thought, then we are really being able to make a big difference to not just the business bottom lines, but perhaps in the design of solutions and businesses, which can be far more transformative to what it is right now, and indeed bring in that whole profit and purpose and the larger ecosystem that both of you all were referring
Yeah.
to, and bring about far more sustainability to the core of businesses. And in fact, what's quite interesting to even note is that when you look at the World Economic Forum skills forecast for literally the next 5 to 10 years, and if you were to look at the top 10, 5 of them are really focused around cognitive skills. It's about analytical thinking, complex problem solving, critical thinking, originality, ideation, problem solving. So if that is the forecast, it becomes even more important for us to really help leaders think about how they're cognitively right now thinking, how themselves they're making decisions and their teams per se. And indeed, the other things that are there in the World Economic Forum is all around a skill forecast, is around leadership, social influence, resilience, stress tolerance, flexibility, active learning, learning strategies. All of this very pertinent because we're living in a world which is unpredictable. And I'm absolutely
Serena,
delighted that
those,
and I'm absolutely
sorry.
delighted that the AI program is actually focusing on these three elements, which can help bring about that change in business leaders as well. Rosie, I know you had a comment. I'm very conscious of time. We just have a couple of minutes before we need to sign off for our lovely guests who are probably very busy as well. But Daryl, just if I can kind of ask you to give me a very quick 1 minute comment about if we are looking in the ALMP program on topics such as applied neuroscience, looking at how people are thinking, biobehavioral techniques, strengths-based development, how could that help businesses and leaders? And I know you've experienced it, so I'd love to have some soundbite from you.
Yeah, so really quickly, Rena, as we started the business and grew the business, it was very process driven, all about the bottom line, because you need to survive, especially in the early days, to get your business off the ground. When we started to think about growing the business, we started to think about our people as our greatest asset, and we started to think about their strengths rather than their weaknesses. And what we found is that once we encouraged or supported our staff and ourselves as leaders to start to explore our strengths and don't worry about our weaknesses so much, and we align that to the purpose and vision of the business, in actual fact, the business itself naturally started to grow because our folks, our people, yes, they're getting a salary and they're getting paid, but also they were committed to the purpose and vision of the business. And that actually transferred over into their home lives and their communities. So it's actually made a huge difference to our business. And hence, in terms of leadership, that's why I'm sitting here having this conversation today, because it's helped me to really explore and unpick some of those shortcuts and those hardwired things to help me to become not afraid to be able to take that business where it needs to go into that next place. But I had to go through a bit of work to be able to do that.
On that very courageous note, I have a feeling I'll need to get Rosie and Daryl back again because there was so much more that needed to be shared and needed to be discussed. And I know, Rosie, you had a viewpoint as well. But again, very conscious of time and to respect your time as well as that of our listeners. Let me take this time to actually sign off from today's TBQ Live with a very quick look into what we might be talking about time. The first, second Tuesday of the month of May, where we're going to have two amazing from the world of corporations as well as entrepreneurship. We're going to talk about stories and strategies at career inflection points, and we are going to look at that 7-year mark and what really takes place and how is it that people could bring about some really winning strategies to develop a career which is aligned to their purpose as well as their strengths. But in the meantime, can I just take a moment to say thank you, Daryl? Thank you, Rosie, for being here with me. Absolute pleasure as always. Absolute delight to have you with me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Rena.
Bye for now. Bye,
Thank you, Reena, for
Rosie.
having
Bye-bye.
us.
Bye,
Bye for
Daryl.